Good morning. Good morning. We're talking about a serious subject, but we like to have fun too. So probably gonna laugh and talk about some serious stuff. But anyway, I'm gonna get Whitney to start on the end with, what did you say? Your name, what you do, how long you've been doing it.
I knew I was going to start first. So I should have sat in the middle. I'm Whitney Trotter. I'm originally from Austin, Texas, but I've been in Memphis for about 10 years. I'm a registered dietitian, nurse, and yoga teacher. I do a lot of work in human trafficking. I used to serve for 7 years at the Shelby County Rape Crisis Center, where I was a part of their SART team, which is the Sexual Assault Response Team. And I also am one of the co-founders of an anti-trafficking nonprofit in Memphis called RestoreCorps. And I have a private practice where I do nutritional counseling for people with eating disorders. So a lot of the intersection of eating disorder, food justice, and trauma.
All right, next, Danita.
My name is Danita Calhoun. I am a native Memphian. Grew up in South Memphis. I work for Young Life. I serve as the area director for Memphis Young Lives, which is outreach and focused on teenage mothers in our city. I've been on staff with Young Life for 14 years, and I've been in vocational ministry for more than 20 years. I'm the mother of 3 adult children and 3 grandchildren, and the best wife to Cedric Calhoun.
Amen. All right, Teresa, thank you.
Hi, I'm Teresa Hall-Franklin, and I also grew up in South Memphis as well. Attended LeMoyne College, University of Memphis. I've been in the mental health field since 2002. Feel pretty dated by saying that, but 18 years in counseling, board certified counselor, licensed professional counselor, EDS and mental health counseling. Private practice inside of Clark Tower, where I focus on PTSD, marital counseling, anger management, stress management, and mood disorders.
All right. Thank you, Teresa. Nateela.
So hi, I'm Nateela. I have grown up in Carterville, so a native to the 901 area. I went to UT Martin, and I got my clinical mental health counseling degree from Freed-Hardeman University. I have experience working at youth villages with at-risk youth. I've also interned at the Summit at HealthQuest doing IOP or intensive outpatient therapy with adults and adolescents. Currently, I am a mental health counselor working at Heart Life Professional Soul Care. It's a private practice in Germantown, and I specialize in mood disorders, trauma, anxiety with children and adolescents as well.
Awesome. So you can see we have a distinguished panel here, right? So I'm going to jump right in and start with our first question, and I'm going to ask Nateela to kind of give us a working definition of trauma. So if you would go ahead, and then also if anybody else has anything to add to that.
Yeah, so my working definition of trauma would be a psychological wound that is caused by a distressing event that exceeds a person's ability to cope. So simply put, as we kind of move forward in our understanding of trauma, it's broadened, right? And so what we're finding is it can literally be anything that we experience or even witness that exceeds our ability to cope and move forward. Please, if anyone has anything else to add.
No?
I thought that was great.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. All right, so we're going to move right along. So in the media and social media and on the news, people of color are seeing all types of things happen to people that look like them. And so the question is, how can the constant images of death towards people of color affect men and women of color, given your perspective field? So you've named off your fields. How have you seen what type of trauma can it put on people? Maybe not affected directly, but what types of things have y'all seen in your perspective field? Danita, you can start out.
I've seen where what the terminology of vicarious trauma is happening with the population of teens that I get the privilege to serve, because of all the things that's going on around them and in their world, and the fact of being a teenage mom and navigating that. What I've noticed most is there's kind of like this numbness to it because they become so accustomed to the different types of traumas that's not only happening within their home but in their community. And so it's both like complex and vicarious, just all those things that are happening, and that's causing them to become numb to what's going on around them.
Yeah. All right, Whitney, have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just to echo what Danita said. And I think we hold trauma in different places in our body. And so with the population that I serve, it manifests a lot in the GI system. And some of that plays out in eating disorders where you're binging and secondary coping skills of like numbing your body. And I completely agree. It's that complex trauma that you see over and over and over again that some people are getting desensitized to, but then there's like a heightened awareness in your body. And, you have anxiety in your chest and difficulty breathing. And every time you get into your car, there's an innate fear of what could happen.
Yeah.
So,
Teresa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and in mood disorders, speaking to what everyone else has said, just anxiety, the fears, the depression, the numbness, the panic of the unknown. The fear of the unknown is most common.
Yeah. So I know for sure that I've seen it as well in the kids that I minister to as well. Danita and Nateela, I'm going to get y'all. So what are some identifiable signs that help parents recognize trauma in their own children? And if anyone else has something to add to, but Danita and Nateela, since I know for sure y'all definitely have your field of working with children as well.
I would say like behavioral changes. They may notice that a child, mood, like you said, mood changes, their behavior change. They may even turn towards more risky behavior. And then some turn to be more, turn toward being more reclusive. And so just paying attention to the behavior change, grades may drop, or you may find out like they're getting involved in things that they are normally not involved in. They're starting to choose friendships that are unhealthy, relationships that are unhealthy. And so those are some of the things that I've noticed. And even in my own life, to be honest, those are some of the signs that I was, dealing with some traumas that had happened in my own life, and just my behavior began to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then to add to that, I would say, especially for elementary school age kids, you're going to see a lot of acting out behaviors. And so what we would normally look at and say, oh, this child is exhibiting disobedient behavior, it's kind of being able to take a step back and say, what's going on here? What has my child potentially experienced that could cause this behavior? Because oftentimes kids are looking for methods of gaining control because they feel powerless and helpless to change whatever has happened or what could be currently happening. And it presents as disruption in the classroom, or maybe more aggression at home and difficulty, minding directives. So just kind of being able to state, is there more to it than just my child being disobedient?
Whitney, do you have anything to add?
I thought that was great. I would say I would look for, sleep, any sleep patterns, behavior patterns, relationship patterns. I would say in the adolescents that I work with, definitely positive reinforcement. I think parents, being just active in every aspect of their child's life. And one of the things that we do with the adolescents that I work with is we try to incorporate family-based therapy. And so one of the goals is we actually ask the parent or the guardians to have 3 meals in the evening with no distractions. and to make sure that kids aren't like hoarding food. If there is, and we can talk about trauma and food insecurity later, but just those basic behavior needs, if there is a shift in that, could be a really good indicator that something is going on.
Oh, I actually would like you to go a little bit further with the trauma and the food insecurities.
So one of the things that we're talking a lot about, there's a big misconception, is that Black folks don't struggle with eating disorders or body image. And we know that that's inherently not true. Unfortunately, the eating disorder world has been primarily the stereotype of affluent white women. And it was thought as a kind of a preconceived notion of food insecurity, you can't also have an eating disorder. But we know with the lack of food accessibility and food insecurity, it does manifest as trauma. So what we're seeing is children and adolescents, if they're food insecure, when they're adults, they don't have a healthy relationship with their food or body, and it's a trauma response.
Has anybody else seen that kind of, if they're working with their patients, or anybody you're ministering to, anybody else seen that? And can you think of an example of maybe an acting out? Well, I would say this. I know for sure. There was a student that I was ministering to, and she grew up with food insecurities, and I know for sure. We think, what is it? They may have an attitude when you don't give them the candy that they ask for. When it's not just the candy; it's that you're denying them food. And so, if they don't have food at home and I just want something to eat. Because I'm not getting it at home, the attitude is not just the attitude. The attitude is I'm hungry and you're not seeing that, and I don't want to tell you I don't have food at home. So that's what I've experienced. And I don't know. I mean, I know for sure you probably have had something come across you like that, but I know when you said food insecurities and the trauma that brings about, that's the one thing that popped in my mind. And I didn't find that out until I started taking the young lady home. But anyway, we're going to move on. So, Teresa, will you share some healthy techniques to manage anger and stress in our current climate? So, our current climate, everything that's going on, COVID, all the stuff that you've seen on the media, obviously that brings about stress and a lot of anger within our community.
Right. Well, I think first you have to recognize what your warning signs are, your triggers are, so that you're not exposing yourself to them just when you don't need to. And so in knowing what those triggers are, then you can create healthy ways to cope and to deal with it. And obviously it could be counseling, seeing a licensed, trained professional, or it could be meditation at home. It could be reading. It could be spending time with your children. It could be praying, obviously. It could be journaling. Just so many different techniques of self-care even. I've gotten into making my own hair care products on the weekend. And so that's what I look forward to doing. That's my me time. That's what I get a chance to do. So anything that brings you comfort and pleasure, that helps you to distract your mind. We know that many times when we spend too much time thinking about something, it's almost the addiction of thinking. And here comes another thought and 50 more thoughts. And then now you're in this spiral of depression and anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and it just goes on and on. So being able to give yourself a break from that and just do something that you love and that you care about.
Yeah, I know in our household, we call those rabbit holes where we start spiraling down. Anybody else have anything to add to those?
I would add just healthy boundaries, because there's a lot going on right now. And so it's very easy to find yourself giving so much emotionally in support of other people. I know work demands have been increasing on everyone in multiple fields. So being able to say, I'll only do work between this time and this time to ensure that you are making space to take care of yourself and practicing self-care, because oftentimes we're so focused on scheduling what we need to do and kind of forget that it's important to schedule time for ourselves as well. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yes. So this can be a kind of a little touchy subject. So I want anybody that will jump in. How does someone recognize, honestly confront recognize and honestly confront their own traumatic experience. So we, as a community, don't necessarily, we like to push stuff to the side. How do we do that? How do we get to that point where we need to address it and honestly take care of it?
I think that, as a culture, we have just normalized so much, just growing up in South Memphis. We have, I'm sure, similar stories, shared stories, and across, all the zip codes in Memphis and in other cities as well. But, sometimes we see it so much, we become desensitized. And we just say, that's just kind of a part of growing up. That's just, part of North Memphis, South Memphis, whatever. But it is trauma, and I've had students, I also teach psychology, but I've had students to talk about, seeing their first dead body at 7. And, and it was almost nothing, because once they saw the second one, then it's like, oh, okay, well, this is almost normal. This is, was part of my community, but it's not normal. And as we all know, in PTSD and post-traumatic stress disorder, it doesn't typically manifest until years later. And so, you saw your first dead body at 7, but you might not see the manifestation of it or the effects of it until you're 25 or 35, or when you have your first child, or when your first child starts, school or something like that.
I would also say I grew up in a time where we were taught to not talk outside of our homes. And so growing up in that time where all the bad stayed within the family, because it wasn't the thing to talk outside your home. You don't talk outside your home. You don't tell our family business. And so you learn to suppress those things. And in suppressing those things, when other things began to come out in the community, in the school, in your school, your friends or whatever, you don't know how to deal with those things. And so it's been probably more recently that I myself realized, oh, I need to go to counseling. And that was something that was also talked about in the era that I grew up in, because it wasn't a thing for Black people to go to counseling, And so being able to do that and go to counseling and realize, like, a lot of my own trauma was centered around abandonment and this sense of abandonment. And so whether people died because of natural causes or walked out of my life or didn't have the presence of my dad, it didn't matter which way they left. I had this issue with abandonment. And so now I'm working with a population of teenage mothers who have this same sense of abandonment, and I live it all over every day. And so I have to make sure that I'm keeping myself healthy by making sure I'm staying actively engaged, being able to have a space where I can drop that off in order to be able to help somebody else.
Let's talk about the stigma around Black people not going to counseling. So all of y'all are professionals in this realm, and clearly y'all are all women of color. So how did y'all get to a place where you're like, oh wait, counseling is the thing, like, we are supposed to do this to take care of ourselves? Like, how did you get to, and you don't have to get super personal, but how did you get to a place where, Danita, you just shared, how do you get to a place where it's okay? Like, we grew up and said, oh, we're going to keep this in. We don't talk about this. Yeah. Like, there was something that said, I actually need to be an advocate for my community to say, you need this, just like you need to go to the doctor when you have a cold, Right. How do you get to that place?
Right. Well, definitely mental health and physical health are the same. As I tell clients, you would not sit in your chair and have a heart attack and not call 911. But you sit in your beds and you stay in your beds all day long, battling with depression and anxiety, and you never reach out, And so it's making that connection that physical health and mental health are very much aligned, and in touch with each other. But I think also, too, going a step further is due to resources and a lack of resources. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so with me accepting insurance now, I see an influx of clients where I'm, of color that are using their benefits or using their resources to seek counseling. So I do see that turning a little bit if there are resources for them to use and with transportation in their community. So it's so important to have, small mental health centers in the communities that need them. So if a person does have transportation issues, they're able to still, seek those services without being, just not able to receive those services. Yeah.
I think too, just echoing that, I think people of color have had so much trauma. And sometimes when you live in such high traumatic situations, you don't even recognize that it's trauma. You get desensitized, you become accustomed to it. I think also, so my dad grew up outside of College Station, a very, very small Black town. And there were so many things that happened. No one talked about it. No one processed. And I was talking to my cousin, and we both have therapists. I don't know how you work in our field and you don't. I would always question if you're seeing somebody and they're not seeing somebody. And we were talking, I was like, I can't believe that no one else in our family is in therapy. I mean, it was just like, we were just talking. It was like none of our parents, grandparents, it wasn't accessible to them, but everything was, you go to the pastor, you pray about it, and you desensitize it. And I truly do think that's how eating disorders start in the Black community, and you numb. It's just this cycle of just numbing and stuffing it down. And I do think as we continue to have an increase in Black professionals representation, and I think that's the biggest thing, is we're going to have more resources, like Teresa said, in the community, because we need it. We need it when you're going through racial trauma. I have a lot of clients that have suffered racial trauma. They want a clinician of color. So I think that's really important, is increasing access, but increasing representation with that access.
I know also, Whitney, you've done several podcasts or IG Lives where you've talked about also people of color not wanting to go to even the doctor because of the history. Can you briefly talk about that?
Yeah. So I have my own background with medical trauma, and but I really started understanding. I worked in the HIV clinic, so when I originally became a dietitian, that's all I wanted to do was work in HIV and AIDS. So I did, and when I worked at kind of a center of excellence, but I had clients who their family members were a part of the Tuskegee experiment. So when they would come to the HIV clinic, all the nurse practitioners were Black. Every doctor was white. So there was a racial stigma there, and they did not want to see the doctors, understandably so. And so I really did a lot of research and learning about that, but that's an innate fear that I think we don't often in the medical community, especially being a nurse, there's a lot of stigmas. I mean, we're seeing more and more research come out about this perception that Black people, particularly Black women, have a higher pain tolerance. And I saw it in the ER. There's a physician that would call it wimpy white boy syndrome. And so they would literally give young white boys pain medication faster because they did not think that they could tolerate pain medication. And so you're seeing this come out more and more, and just like Serena Williams, of her birth trauma and birth history and everything that she went through. So it's very real. It's very evident. There's so much that needs to be unlearned in our medical community, especially how we treat Black and brown people. But it's a real fear, and it's something that we do need to address and bring forth and give our patients room to express that and validate that.
Absolutely. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay. So next, we kind of briefly talked about managing anger and stress. So are there some daily things? I know you talked about self-care, kind of like on maybe a weekly thing or just maybe on a whim. But are there some daily things to help manage trauma and stress? Because people are really, sometimes it's an everyday thing. So what are some things that we need to do to help manage those moments where it's like, wait, something just triggered me and I need to take a moment? What are some of those things? And anybody can jump in.
Personally, I just started practicing yoga, which has been good. I started stretching first thing in the morning before I do anything else. I just stretch my body. I noticed that a lot of my stress and trauma is carried in my shoulders. and in my neck. And I start having like, when I can feel a migraine coming on, I know like I'm stressing, whether I'm saying it, I'm thinking it. And it's like you said, it's just thoughts just playing over, and it goes downhill. So just even beginning to practice just stretching my body out and breathing, taking time to just take deep breaths and breathe. But yoga has been, just sitting in the floor and just listening to relaxation music and taking on those practices of even at nighttime. Once, say go to sleep, sometimes I just put on like calming music to help me to sleep through the night. So
I would echo that, being a yoga teacher. I love that's one of the reasons I got into yoga. I prayer, meditation, any type of mindful movement, and definitely yoga. I think yoga is, and when you look at the origins of yoga, was actually when it was developed, it was to help with mental health. So there's definitely a correlation between the mental and physical embodiment of yoga.
Right. Yeah, and they're both right. So I just like to add the acceptance piece, though. ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is about accepting your trauma, accepting your emotions. And so sometimes when we reject that, we're causing more, or we deny ourselves to even think back to those moments. We're allowing that trauma and the depression and the anxiety associated with it to come more frequently, because it's really there to get our attention, and it's there for us to recognize it, to accept it. And acceptance doesn't mean you approve of it. Acceptance just simply means that you acknowledge that it happened, and you don't have to continue to force your mind to suppress something that naturally wants to come up for you to address it.
Talk a little bit more about suppression, because we've seen kind of, maybe even in the media or even like TV, they make up stuff, but some of it's true, right? Mm-hmm. When people suppress things and they have these outbursts, could it have been that they held it in for such a long time? Yeah, or is it like just this could happen all the time?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you sweep things under the rug and you stuff and suppress, eventually it rises to the top. And as it rises to the top, you never know when you're going to explode, when it's going to come out. It's unpredictable, but what you can manage is the amount of things you suppress. Yeah. And knowing that no one has it all together. And so there are going to be times where things do bother you, rightfully so, and they should bother you. And it's okay if they bother you, so you can accept that part and not have to suppress it and put on a happy face or a mask, literally, to hide and conceal what's really troubling you. That, we all are experiencing some sort of distress in our lives, and it can be frequent. It could be daily, weekly, situational. We've all experienced grief and loss to some degree, whether it was our family members or friends or classmates. And so knowing that we will have troubles in this lifetime, and as the Bible tells us, we can overcome those as well.
Yeah. So I know we talked a little bit before about seeing all these images in social media and all those things, and I know they promote all these emotions that come out. And what I've seen is there are a lot of people that have all this anger. And Teresa, I want you to speak a little bit more anger, and then somebody may not have originally had a problem with anger, but now they've developed something because they feel like people that look like them have been attacked, and now they're just this walking, ticking time bomb. Can you kind of speak to what, how can one even try to figure out, like, what do I need to do to not internalize everything that I see? Because they're they may not have experienced it directly, but I don't need to internalize everything I see. I'll be sad all the time, or I'll be angry all the time. I'll be walking around and yelling at people that don't even know me,
Right. Well, so, I definitely believe there's a kinship in our culture. And so we are interrelated. And so when we see faces and people who look like us being treated as such, then we take offense to that. because it's a direct reflection of ourselves. And so also then you look at the justice piece, the lack of justice and the lack of advocacy for us. And so you feel almost like you're charged with that call, to take it on as well. And so that can be a difficult thing to separate. It's also part of just who we are as human beings and empathizing with our fellow man and wanting to stand up for him or her and to take on that fight with them. And so I think, obviously it's healthy to feel interconnected and interrelated to people and to empathize. But at some point you will have to, per se, set a time on that, set some boundaries and some parameters around that. So that you're not literally inducing a panic attack on yourself. And so there's a time to act, there's a time to pray, there's a time to, console and reach out to people. But then there's also a time for us to take care and practice some self-care of ourselves.
Anybody have any extras?
When you asked that, I automatically thought about like how long we as a culture, as a people, have learned how to code switch. And so, and when we begin to code switch, we're not our authentic selves. And I think what we're seeing now in the culture is that we are becoming a people who are like, no, this is me. This is who I am. And that's where you're seeing like, people are, as they say, they're becoming more woke about who they are as a culture, as a people, and they're tired of code switching. And so they don't know how to use that anger in the right way, as Erica was saying, and they're using it in a way that can sometimes come across violent or destructive or whatever, but being able to embrace who we really are and not, feeling like I need to, for me to assimilate into this culture, I need to code switch so I can, stay on the right path or whatever. But I think that's what I'm noticing that's happening. And people are like, nope, this is me. And I'm embracing who I am now, but finding the healthy way to do that not only a way that brings God glory in a people, in our, who we are as individuals and who we are as a culture of people.
Yeah, I think about how I had to learn how to do that. My mom sent me to Memphis. I'm originally from Nashville. My mom sent me to Memphis to learn how to, because Memphis the population has always been, a large population of Black people of color. And then I grew up in Nashville where it's more metropolitan. So she sent me here so that I can know who I was, right? But in Nashville, I went to a private school and grew up. And so I learned how to code switch. She didn't tell me I had to do it, but I learned how to code switch. And I noticed that at some point, you're not authentically you because you find yourself either, raising your voice a little bit so that people can think you're not, you're not offending anyone, or you notice like when you are around a different culture that you do change your facial expressions, or even everything's okay, you push it down. And I've noticed that I still do it, and it's really hard to unlearn, especially if you learn it as a young person. So I feel like this is one of those times where you actually have to say, baby, to the children, it's okay to be who you are, and I feel like maybe at some point that is a slow burn of a traumatic experience, and I'm not clinical at all, but it's a kind of a slow burn because it's telling you you're not good enough the way you are to talk to whoever else you want to talk to outside of your community. Or even if there are people of color that are fluent, you're not good enough how you are to talk to other people. And thanks for bringing that up. That's great. And I didn't mean to talk a lot. Nateela, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that I feel that it's safe to say that it's a collective trauma, right? Like something that we've all experienced for generations to generations. And I'm seeing it in my own grandparents, where it's taking them back to a time where they're feeling as if all of this is coming to a head. And then for the younger kids, the adolescents and children that I see, it's shaping how they perceive the world, how they perceive themselves, and how they relate to other people. And there's already beginning to grow this seed of, I can't trust the other. And so it's continuing this unhealthy generational cycle. And so it's really just something where there needs to be a lot of processing and being able to share and feeling open and safe to do that. And so that's kind of what I'm seeing now.
Yeah, I think we do have to, and even us, we have to be able to be a safe space for some people. I know you all have your own practices and then we all practice, but at some point we have to look at people and say, it's okay for you to share. And then say, okay, I'm not a professional. I need you to go. I need you to go talk to somebody who actually has the tools, that I don't have. So I'm rounding third and heading home here. I know. So I did have a question from someone, and this is pretty weighty to me. Can a person heal from trauma without therapy? I know it's a yes or no question, but please elaborate, because I know that's kind of one of those, especially in the body of Christ,
It's such a good question. I think what is interesting about that question is if a client was coming to me and asking me that, I would say, what's the root of that? And I'll say one of the therapists that I work with, she's also a believer, but what we're seeing in kind of like purity culture, it's manifesting in a very religious mindset. And so there really is, and I know it sounds so cliche of Jesus and therapy, but it really is true, because we're seeing some of the perfectionism, the anxiety, the OCD of I have to do everything right. I have to do everything right. This is sin. This is not sin. And so we're seeing a lot of that in our clients. And I think that's very destructive. So I would tell that person, I don't think that you can heal from complex trauma without therapy, because I think pastors are great. I'm married to a person in the ministry. A prayer is fundamental, but God gives us all gifts, right? And like each one of us, he has ordained with capability and skills and insight and wisdom. So why wouldn't you use that? And I think too, it goes back to, I think in the Black community, we just haven't had that. I mean, when you look at the IG Live that you and I were talking about recently with Dr. Laura Taylor, one of the books that we've been talking a lot about is post-traumatic slave syndrome. And when all that trauma started, all we had was the church, but now we have more. And so let's use those resources that we have in our community.
Absolutely. Nateela, do you have anything to add to that?
I would say from an adolescent and child perspective, definitely no, because oftentimes, whereas we see children as being resilient, like they can bounce back from all of these things, what we find is that as they become adolescents, as they grow up into young adults and adults, it's shaping how they respond to their world. And so if they never enter into a therapeutic environment that helps them to see, do you realize that you're thinking this way or you behave this way every time this happens, they'll never be able to learn how to correct it, because at first there's got to be an acknowledgement. But as we've been talking about, if you've normalized all of these things, how can you acknowledge something that you already perceive as okay?
Danita.
I was thinking healing is an ongoing process, especially when you work with a population of people where it's always your own trauma is always in your face. And so you have to stay before the Lord, and you yourself, as you're working to help others, you have to make sure that you are staying healthy emotionally and physically, by, having someone to walk through life with you as well, through as a clinician, someone who God has gifted and given the resources. They've gone to school, they've learned all of these things and how to help you navigate. But when your trauma is always in your face, healing has to be an ongoing process.
Absolutely. Teresa?
No, I agree with what everyone has said. Counseling, when you're taking a Christian perspective on it, it's rooted in Romans, when the book talks about be ye transformed by the mind first. And so obviously there is, God created a purpose for counselors to address those needs, So with that, we just literally have to do away with some of the teachings of Big Mama and, what goes on in this house stays in this house. But if the house is dysfunctional and unhealthy, the whole house needs to go to counseling.
Can you say it again? Say that again in the mic for the people in the back. Yes, I do. Yeah, the whole house. Yes, ma'am, the whole house.
The whole house.
Not just I'm gonna send you and everything's gonna be okay. The whole house. Yes, because people like to think that you're the only one that needs help. Like there's a reason why I'm acting out. Hello, do you see where I grew up? So no, ladies, I appreciate. So right now I'm gonna ask y'all get your thinking caps on. This is my last question. And then maybe we can, if we can open up to if anybody has anything from the floor. You said 2 minutes? 2 questions. We do have 2 questions. Okay. What are some resources for more understanding and help? So I know y'all have studied a plethora of things and read some things. And Whitney, you just threw one out and I just bought that book and I'm about to dive into it.
Do it together.
Yes. So some resources. So it could be podcasts, it could be IG Lives, it could be books, it could be any type of resources for understanding and help.
Well, psychologytoday.com is a great resource. Typically, all of the articles are written by a trained professional or research-backed. But also, there's a couple books, The Body Keeps Score. And then there's another book, Get Past the Past. But the only way to get through it or to get through the past is to go through it. And so it just kind of lays out the framework for you to take when you're navigating yourself through trauma.
Nateela, do you have any?
Yeah, I would say, for kind of a focus on adolescents and children, The Boy That Was Raised as a Dog is a really good book, as it's written by a child psychologist that works with different kids that experience various traumas, and the things that he utilized, the therapeutic methodologies that he'd used to kind of help them work through it. Mind Matters is a good book. It's basically about how specifically mental health illness is manifested in the African American community. And so that book has been pretty profound. And then, like Teresa said, The Body Keeps the Score is very good as well. So I would definitely highly recommend all of those books.
Danita, do you have anything?
I was thinking more so some of the things that I've been able to help with are goal and vision setting with the population of teens that I get the privilege to work with, doing like SWOT analysis, kind of researching. My husband and I this morning was just talking about like even me still going back, trying to trace my family, doing not so much the genealogy of why my grandparents and this, just all the things that make up who I am. And so something a little more practical with like setting goals and what would stop you from accomplishing this, your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunity. What is the threat for you that's, that'll keep you from overcoming some of the things that you live with. So a lot of things I've done or that has been beneficial to me has been, and it's because I know what type of learner I am. I'm a visual learner, so and kinesthetic, so I have to be doing so I can get it. So even recognizing what type of learner you are is huge as well.
Yeah, I would definitely say The Body Keeps the Score is an excellent resource. One of the books that I've been using with some of my adolescent families is How to Nourish Your Child Through an Eating Disorder. And it really gives ownership to the parents of kind of the whole division of responsibility and walking them through how to observe any behaviors with feeding and body image. I think honestly, the best thing is having open conversations with your kids of how do you view your body? How are you loving yourself? How do you feel about yourself? Things like that, having those conversations, because I think that can kind of lead you to different resources that's applicable for your family.
All right, so now we're going to go to the crowd.
If there are, you can start.
Okay.
If there are two questions, you can just repeat them on the microphone.
All right. So does anyone have any questions? If you have any questions for the panel, I'd
And you can repeat it.
love to hear them, and I'll repeat it. Yes.
What are some things you can tell people who don't want counseling, but you can see that they need it? What are some ways you can? I don't know. What are some things you can tell them?
What are some ways we can help people that they need counseling, but they don't want it. They don't want to accept it. You can see they need it, but they don't want it, but you need to be able to steer them in the right direction.
I'll go first. I think one, giving space to that fear and validating it. Again, there's so much trauma in the Black community from mental and medical health. I actually recently worked with a woman who went to therapy for the first time. She was seeing a white clinician, and they immediately called Lakeside. And it was just such a traumatic experience. So I would ask, what's the fear? Maybe they already had a bad experience. Mm-hmm. And then if you know someone that is trusted, you could point them to them and say, hey, I actually really know this person. They're professional, and give them, I think, I don't want to speak for anybody on the panel, but sometimes I think it's helpful before people make a commitment to interview the person. I have people call all the time and say, what's your fee? What is it like? Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And so giving them, telling them, because a lot of people don't even know that's an option. But I think definitely validating the fear, asking what's behind it, pointing them to people that that are safe spaces, are all really good first steps.
Teresa?
I agree with Whitney. I think it is healthy for any and everyone who's thinking about counseling to be able to ask, what's your approach? How long have you been doing this? And as counselors, we're not to impose our values or views. It's to help you guide and not navigate your own. And so just making sure that counselor is able to do that. And I get tons of clients who want hands-on practical resources, and that's what they get. And some clients want just a listening ear, and that's what they get. And so being able to even code switch in counseling according to what the need of the client is very important.
Nateela, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, just working to normalize it, right? So sometimes it's difficult to have that conversation, but being able to say, this is something that I would do for myself. And here's are the ways that I think it would be beneficial to me as it could be for you. So just helping them to see that it's not this far reaching thing that we can't engage in, just making it more an everyday thing, and even having people around them that are seeing therapists as well and how it's benefiting them. So giving them that ear, this is a positive experience and this is how it's helped me.
Yeah, I would say this. I know the first time that I went, I was a little leery, and I went to a person that was not a person of color, but she was asking me to be an advocate for our community. She was like, your community needs a lot more help. And she wasn't trying to be funny, and she wasn't trying to down me at all. She was like, I commend you for coming in. And she was like, you don't even have to call it therapist, counselor, whatever. You can call me an analyst. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, that just kind of made me, it took my guard down a whole lot to be able to, an analyst, that's what you're doing. You're analyzing what I'm saying and you're just giving me some tools. So that would be my little tidbit. Yes.
I almost feel like every question that you would ask, the answer would be go to counseling. So let me ask this question. My wife and I, this is my wife.
Love those shoes. Love those shoes.
And so here's my question. We went to counseling, and I don't know how many sessions we did, but it was slow progress. We felt like it was a bad experience to the extent that we didn't cover get much mileage out of a lot of sessions. So, what are some signs early on for trauma that you have a good counselor that you're dealing with?
So,
what signs of poor that they're dealing with that?
So the question is, what are some signs early on that you have a good counselor? So as far as trauma is concerned, right, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. Is that on the counselor's end that you have a good counselor?
When you're looking for a counselor or when you start those sessions, because I almost feel like, you can maybe get some recommendations, but if you get somebody and go, maybe your insurance gives you limited options. How do you know when you made a bad choice?
Oh, okay. How do you know when you've made a bad choice? And or what are some signs that you have a good counselor? I know.
So
Clearly, all y'all are good counselors.
So counseling is almost in the eye of the beholder. It's one of those very gray areas. But for me, as a practitioner, I like for my clients to walk away with something. I like for them to have some sort of connection, some sort of aha moment, some sort of goal for the next week or, in between sessions. And empathy, and so sometimes, when you're in your first couple of sessions, the counselor is still collecting data and collecting information. And so maybe the first couple of sessions, they can really only empathize, and establish a really healthy rapport with you. And then as you go from there, then they begin to give you some information. So it's a bi-directional relationship. And so I have clients who come in from the jump and they tell me, I had a counselor who just, did this for the 50 minutes of the session. And I said, well, that's not me. I'm very, hands-on. And it's like, I'm looking for someone like that. But so, as a client, you can tell the counselor, what you're looking for, what you're needing, what you've already tried. I have clients who are very educated and understand very much what they're going through. They're just simply needing a plan. And so you can share that with that therapist and our feelings won't be hurt. If you are that direct, it's like, great, here it is, let's start working from here.
Great. So last thing, I'm going to need everyone, if you have a website or a way that somebody, if they want to reach out to you, to get in contact with you, to take advantage of your services, would you please let us know what that is? I'm going to start with you, Nateela. So a website or an email or something like that.
So the website for me would be heartlifesoulcare.org. And so on there, I think you can find my email address, which would be nmcgee@heartlifesoulcare.org.
Okay, and mine is gotangermanagement.com, and that's gotangermanagement.com.
Mine's is danita.younglife@gmail.com for Young Life.
You can find me on the Psychology Today, Whitney Trotter, and then also I do, monthly, twice a month, free Instagram lives with clinicians of color. So it's Bluff_City Health.
All right. Thank you, ladies.